Welcome to the AUA Inside Tract Podcast. Today's Inside Tract Podcast is brought to you by the Residents and Fellows Committee and was originally presented during the Residents Forum program at AUA 2022 in New Orleans. Panel moderator, Dr. Rachel Mann, is joined by Drs. Christopher Jaeger, Elizabeth Koehne, Amanda North, Phillip Pierorazio, and Angela Smith for a discussion on wellness and solutions to avoid burnout.
Hello, everyone. I am delighted to host today's panel. I think it's really pertinent for all of us in the room. Beyond Wellness, Sustainable Solutions to Avoid Burnout. I'm going to introduce the panel today. We have Dr. Angie Smith down at the end. She is Associate Professor and Director of Urologic Oncology and Vice Chair of Academic Affairs at UNC Chapel Hill. Let's see, I can't see who we're... Okay, excellent. We have Dr. Phillip Pierorazio. He is the Chief of Urology at Penn and creator of the Operate with Zen podcast. Next, we have Dr. Amanda North, Associate Professor of Pediatric Urology at Montefiore. She has done extensive research on wellness and burnout, so I'm really going to appreciate her input in this session. Next, we have Dr. Betsy Koehne, PGY6 resident at Loyola. And last but not least, we have Dr. Christopher Jaeger, Pediatric Urology Fellow at Boston Children's. So thank you all for joining us. So I would like this to be fairly informal, and I was hoping that somebody could kind of take the lead, and if you would feel comfortable, if anyone has a personal story of their own burnout, would anyone be willing to share of sort of how that came to be?
I actually talk about it a lot, so some may have actually heard this story, but I think burnout is something that creeps up on you in my experience. And I remember, you go through you go through medical school and then residency and then, many fellowship, and then finally have your job. And I think that what happens is, and Sammy had mentioned this, is that a lot of the choices for ourselves are made when we're residents, where to go, what to do, and you forget when you finally get your job that you all of a sudden have choices that you can make, that you are in charge of. And I forgot that, and that's sort of the story of my burnout. I worked, a lot, 7 days a week. I'm sure many of you in this room do that, to try to get your research in. You want to get a fellowship. You want to do, many different things. You wear so many hats. And I was doing that, but I forgot to, we talked about this, take my foot off the gas. And so I guess it was about maybe 2 to 3 years into my first and only. I'm at UNC, and I intend to stay. No rumors. Maybe my second to third year, and I remember going to a colleague's office. They were trying out this mentorship program, and he was sort of just meeting with everybody. And I'll never forget it because I had been working a lot the last 2 years. I was, but I felt like I was good. I'm publishing. I'm doing all of the things that I thought were expected of me. And I remember sitting, and the first question he asked me was, "How are you?" And he said it just like that. He's like, "How are you?" And I started crying. I surprised myself, and I can tell you I very much surprised him. He was like, tissues, I wasn't expecting this. But the next once I collected myself, and I was actually pretty confused of why I was feeling that way, because I think I'd suppressed a lot of feelings. But his next question was, "When was your last vacation?" And I remember thinking back and realizing in those 2 years, I actually hadn't taken a week off. Now, I had a baby. I'd taken 12 weeks, which, should be the norm, but isn't. So I felt that that was
It could be a whole nother discussion.
Right. We could talk about that. But I felt really lucky to have had that. And so to me, I had created that thought in my head that was a vacation. And of course it's not. Anyone who's had a baby, let me tell you, it's not a vacation. Right then and there, I made a decision because I realized that, first of all, I had been making choices all along. I had felt like I wasn't. I felt like I was being told what to do based on the perception of what was expected of me. I started being intentional with the time I take for myself. So I'm a big proponent of like a whole year. I look at the calendar and I just put on every vacation I'm allotted to me. And people are like, well, what are you going to do? I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to block the week and I'll figure it out. And even if it's just a staycation, that's totally cool. But I do that. And I have continued to make incremental changes that, I'm sure we'll be talking about in the panel. But I think those moments of time, they're opportunities to make a change. And you have to be intentional about it. You have to have an awareness. I was very fortunate to have the meeting to make me realize I was burned out because it is so insidious. But that's my story, and I'd love to hear others.
That was excellent. Anybody else have anything they want to share with the panel before we get into?
Well, I'll just add on to what Angie just said. As you get increasing responsibilities, I think controlling your schedule is just so important in preventing burnout. And I was telling Angie this story right before we came up here. I became the site director for pediatric urology in the fall, and I'm about to become the data committee chair, which is a pretty big time-consuming job. And so I blocked my Fridays as a non-clinical day, and every week for 6 months, someone in my office would ask me to either see patients or operate on Fridays. And every week for the last 6 months, I've said, I'm not available on Friday. And for those of you who know me, and I have several residents in the back, thank you for being here, I am not someone who says no very easily. It's not a word that I'm comfortable with. But setting that limit on my time and respecting my own time and forcing, and I think for women it's even harder, to force my staff to understand that when I said I wasn't available on Fridays, I'm not taking vacation on Fridays. I frequently have 5 hours of meetings on Fridays, but forcing them to understand that Friday was not a day they could mess around with took me at least 6 months, and it's still a work in progress. But respect your time. Don't let other people disrespect your time, and that would be like my biggest piece of advice. It's been life-changing.
The slide from the financial talk really resonated with me. The hi, my name is average. I would say that nobody in this room, would consider themselves average. I think a lot of us are overcommitters and we say yes to everything. So I think that's a really important point you bring up about setting boundaries and saying no. Dr. Jaeger, you created a wellness pilot at Ohio State. Can you talk about why you chose to do that? Talk to us about the process. What did that entail? Did you get any pushback for creating something like this?
Not too much. It's nice to have Shirley as your...
She's incredible.
So we noticed, obviously, the burnout phenomenon was real. And we also noticed that a lot of our surgical subspecialty programs had done some sort of wellness program, in urology. Residency, at least at that time, was left out of the conversation, hadn't published anything yet. So we wanted to create something, and we also noticed a need in our own program for it. So we formalized a 24-week wellness pilot, and we did not want to be prescriptive in what we told or asked residents to do. We wanted to give them what we called a menu of options, and this menu is based upon what had been previously published. So, they could choose from fitness, they could choose from sleep, they could choose from nutrition. And we asked them to try everything in the first 12 weeks. And in the second 12 weeks, we asked them to do what they like to do. And we measured burnout before and after. We measured stress throughout. And overall, it was well received. Not everybody participated. Compliance, waned over time, not surprisingly. But we learned a lot from it, and now we've expanded it to faculty. It was just residents in the beginning. Certainly, having a resident champion helps for other programs that want to try this. Having faculty support is needed in the first place to fund it. But yeah, overall well received.
Did you get any pushback from people who might have perceived it as being more work, contributing to burnout? Like I have prescribed, activities to do and try rather than just giving me more free time. Did you ever get that pushback from anybody?
We did a little bit. I mean, we spent a lot of time in the beginning of the program talking about the need.
Yeah.
And I think that that's important for any program that you're trying to implement.
Yeah.
And then also the potential benefits that something like this could afford somebody, not just during residency, but picking up good habits, suppressing bad habits that can compound over time. So
That's great.
Hey, Rachel, can I comment real quick?
Absolutely.
It's one of the frequent comments and criticisms that we hear from residents, and particularly you guys in the room, is that it's really hard to devote time to wellness and being well when you don't really control your own schedule. And the way I kind of answer that, first is by disclosing when I was a resident, I was not particularly well. So a lot of this is said in retrospect and things I've learned. But what I've also learned is by investing in the basics, your physical needs, sleep, nutrition, feeling physically well, it allows you to gain kind of discretional energy and abilities you didn't have and kind of climb up to the things you're more interested in and want to achieve. So it is, physical wellness and all of those parts are the first thing we give up because they're the easiest to give up when we don't have time. But by flipping it on its head and recognizing doing those things will allow you to achieve more. So I think that's a really important perspective that I talk a lot with our residents and trainees, and we try and put forward on the podcast that investment is huge.
Dr. Koehne, you're chief resident applying into fellowship, is that correct? How have you seen wellness evolve over the course of your residency? So from when you were an intern, and how do you think the next generation of residents is going to treat wellness? Have you seen a shift over your 6 years?
Yeah, I think certainly people are just much more aware of it now than when we started, and I think it's just inevitable that in the future, when we're all of us that are still in training are out in practice, that we're just not going to. Things are just going to have to be different for us in terms of like having time off for having a family or just balancing our normal work lives. I'm not like a business administrative person, so I don't really know how that's gonna work, but I think it'll just have to happen. I guess so. Over my experience in residency, I think that this looks different for everyone, like burnout or wellness or whatnot. It's not always that you're like unhappy and really stressed. Personally, I love work. I have a great time at work, and I've like so many friends who are my residents. I love just running around and doing stuff and being busy, and I think a lot of us really like it. It's such an immersive experience, and I think when you're really in it, sometimes it's hard to recognize that even though you feel like you might be doing well and you're like, I'm doing great, or that you might actually just be really running on fumes. And I think I haven't really realized that until I've had a forced stop of just a vacation or a whole year of research or something. And then in hindsight, I'm like, oh yeah, I guess I maybe wasn't doing quite as well as I thought. But I think it's important though to enjoy being at work and really cultivate that experience, because there's no amount of R&R recovery time outside that can make up for just being miserable every day.
I would agree with that. A question for the faculty on the panel along the same vein. Since wellness has been sort of a hot button issue in recent years, have you noticed a paradigm shift or a shift in your residents? Have they been speaking up more about their own wellness? Have they been asking for time off? Have you noticed this? And then part two of the question is, does anyone perceive these asks as being whiny or needy? I think as a trainee, a lot of times you hesitate to ask for anything because you don't want to be perceived as weak or whiny. What would you say to that?
So we know from the resident census on burnout that what residents want is things like being fed when they're on call, having a bed to sleep in, having the ability to attend, this is crazy, residents want to be able to attend their own doctor's appointments during business hours when doctors see patients. I know that's really an unreasonable request, but those were the top three things that residents wanted on the census. The fact that residents feel like they can't ask to have a day off to go see the doctor is appalling, right? We're doctors, we should take care of ourselves. And so it's not whiny, it's realistic. We also know from published data resident burnout, that programs that don't follow the ACGME requirements, like an 80-hour work week, like access to mental health services, residents who attend programs that don't follow the rules have higher rates of burnout. So like the answer is for people to be respectful of their residents, period. I don't think that should be a question, you know? I mean, if you want to train residents, treat them like people. That's pretty easy.
I was just saying, I find it the opposite. I think we try and engage with the residents at the places I've been to bring that out, because most residents don't ask and don't want to ask because there's a lot of stigma associated with asking. So normalizing the conversations, having panels like this are the next steps to getting there.
Just a quick question. So one of the common themes amongst all the panelists is saying no, you know, but many of the times, as people have alluded to, you're saying no to people that are more senior to you, you know, whether it's an attending, you know, hypothetically speaking, a department chair, and it can be sometimes interpreted as you know, being dismissive of those people because you're saying no to them. What are some techniques that you employ when you say no to someone that's more senior to you?
It's like one of my favorite topics. Thank you for the question. I didn't plant that question, by the way. But it's so important because there's an art to saying no, and the art changes depending on where you are in your training or your career. I always had issues with saying no, and that's why it's so important to me, and it really made a change when I had that experience with burnout. I want to take a quick poll in this room. Put your hand up if you dedicate at least 1 hour to yourself. It's just a meeting with yourself once a month. Anybody? Good. Yeah. It's like maybe 4, 5. Phil, you don't count. You got a podcast about this. Okay. But not many people do that. But I would encourage you to do it. It's probably the most, I always say it's the most important. I mean, my chair is actually in this room. I usually say this, but I'm going to say it out loud. It should be more important than a meeting with your chair, is that meeting with yourself. Because when you have that meeting with yourself, you're looking at what you want out of your life. You're looking at what you have on your plate. If you don't know at any one given point how many things you're responsible for, you're not going to be able to know, first of all, the no or yes. Okay, so that's the first piece of the question. So you got to know where you are in your life. But we don't usually dedicate time for that. I guarantee you everyone has time for that. Just once a month, that's it. I do it. So that's the first thing. The second is like, how do you say no? And that is a challenge. Where I'm at in my career, the way I say no, and the way I at least figured out a way for me, it might not resonate with you, is that I always remember that I'm not the only person who can do that job. In fact, there are people who that opportunity would be amazing for that person. So I actually have a list of individuals, like everyone knows I like to promote women, so I have a list of women in UroOnc that I know at varying levels of their career that I will put up for something that I know they aren't the person that people always think about yet, but they will be and they can be. And so sponsorship's really important, no matter who you are, okay? You know, you're a resident, you're like, well, you can do that too, all right? But that may not resonate with you. So you have to figure out a different way if that doesn't. And one way could be being honest, saying, you know, this is a really great opportunity, but listen, it's really important to me, because I bet all in this room everyone agree, it's important for you to do a good job at what you say yes to. So be honest about that. Just say, hey, I would love to do that, but right now, and again, you have this meeting, so you know, I have these responsibilities, and quite frankly, I don't think I can do the job that it deserves right now. And I would recommend somebody else. So you have to find ways to do it, but you do it authentically. Like when I say that, I really mean that, you know? And if you find that way, it feels so much more comfortable to say no. You got to practice a few to see what feels good to you. So thanks for the question.
I would just say Essentialism by Craig McKown, if anybody likes to read this kind of stuff. Happy to talk to you about it, but if you want to read it, that book by Craig McKown is a great way to learn how to say no.
Along those lines, you know, another thing that I struggle with a lot is giving myself grace when I don't do something well, or if I make a mistake, or if I feel like maybe it is time for me to slow down because I'm starting to feel like I'm not going to do things well. Do you all have any advice on how to be a little easier on yourself?
No, I think that's a really good question. I certainly feel that way too. One thing I try to do for myself is sometimes just I feel like I'm always telling my co-residents, don't be so hard on yourself, and maybe just think of yourself as here, and then you're like, don't be so hard on yourself. But it's not easy to do that.
I think that's a really good point. I think speaking to yourself the way you'd speak to your best friend, monitoring your internal dialogue. Like, if I heard my friend say this about him or herself, what would I say to them? And it takes practice, right? We have to practice giving ourselves grace, and I won't say that I'm great at it. I've gotten better at letting things go. The older I get, it becomes easier and easier. But I think practicing talking to yourself the way you would talk to a loved one is just such an important thing to do.
Yeah, and there's a great book called Chatter that many of you may have read, but it speaks to all of these things. And I'll add the one other thing is that speaking to yourself in the third person may sound silly, but I do it all the time. And I think of like the best friend. I actually think of it like my child. I don't know why, just maybe because I'm a mom. And I always I'm like, how would I tell, my 8-year-old if she made a mistake? And I'm just like, Angie, it's okay. I'm human. It's okay. We'll move on.
Hey, Angie, do you really think once a month is enough? I mean, I would argue it's once a day you should be having a conversation about that.
Well, absolutely, but
I'm sorry, I'm being honest. It should
No,
be once a
I
day,
think
not once a month or once a week.
Well, I'm speaking of an actual meeting, like where you book your time, and I'm more of a realistic person. Like, I don't have time to have a meeting with myself once a day. I'd love to. So I try to give more, I'm giving, and again, these are all this is just advice. It's not necessarily, it may not work for everyone. I found for myself once a month, I do actually 3 hours, and I block, and I actually do semi-annual meetings, one on my birthday and one on my half birthday. And I celebrate myself. I mean, I take the day off, and if you can do that, great, and there will come a day, if you can't, you will, okay? But I take the day, and I think about all the things I've achieved. I'm like, it was a pretty good year, and you forget those things. So I think daily, great, but being as busy as we are, that may not be realistic. So it's just like any small habits, you gotta start small. I think just at least once a month is a good way to start, because most of us don't do it. You saw the hands, don't even do it once a month. Great to, that's an aspirational goal to do it daily. But if that feels overwhelming, just start with 1 hour once a month. I do it on the last Friday of the month. And it's just baked into my system, and I never miss it.
And Ruchi, the only other thing, this is all highly individualized, and you got to find what works for you. The only two things I'd say is mindfulness meditation and loving kindness meditations go a long way for me. May not work for everybody in this room. But I think what you're hearing from everybody is a way of processing these things. I like to write. I have a diary that I will reflect on these things on and try and, almost like an M&M, really distill the issues and try and get to kind of the truth. And we've talked about this is, what's the truth? Why did this happen? Why do I feel this way? And by objectifying it, it helps understand and helps give yourself grace, because it's not just you. You're not a bad person, just bad things can happen.
So I have a question, all directed to our residents and fellows first, and to the faculty. There was a paper from Kate Kraft and some other people at the University of Michigan recently that said they surveyed program directors, and 80% of them support screening residents for burnout and mental health concerns, but only 30% of them thought that the program director should be the person to be conducting that evaluation, and there was significant concern, even at the program director level, that a negative outcome could come to a resident who screened positive. Now, obviously, we don't want any of that to happen, and the faculty here all would be very supportive of the residents, fellows turning to anyone in the department, but this is very concerning to me. So I just wanted to get an opinion of where the residents, fellows would think about turning themselves and what our faculty would recommend in that situation.
That's certainly concerning to me too, those results. I think it's still going to take more time to normalize this phenomenon and to do whatever we can to make it known that this is happening, and it starts early. It probably starts long before we enter into residency. But whether or not it's the program director's responsibility, I do think that certainly they should be aware and they should know the impacts on education.
Yeah, we have a formal mentorship program where every resident's paired with a faculty member, and I could see that as being a person who adjacent, but I can see maybe some I think it just depends on the individual and the program director's personality, and so there's a lot of factors there.
I was just going to say, we definitely need to identify people who are burnt out or burning out and be able to provide assistance to them. But I think more importantly, we need to flip this whole paradigm on its head. We need to provide foundational kind of resources and an understanding of how to have a well career. Your surgical career should last 30 years, and you were given zero resources at the beginning to understand how to get there. There are a lot of people who are interested in changing that and improving that.
And just destigmatizing therapy. I liked, and I'll say it to everyone in this room, I have seen a therapist a number of times, and I loved it. I actually called it my spa day, because I would go and, like, how many times do we have, like, a whole hour that you can just talk about yourself and your issues? I mean, we just don't do that. I guess I'm married a psychologist, that's my disclosure. But I did not do that during residency. I truly had never seen a therapist until afterward. And so I think having faculty just verbalize, like, hey, I do it, you know, that goes a long way too. There's so much stigma to it, and there shouldn't be. It's like we don't talk about, if you go to the gym and you get a personal trainer, everyone's like, hey, good job, like, you're going after it. But if you say, hey, I'm getting a therapist who, a psychologist who's, like, helping you, again, it's like personal training for your emotions. Like, it's like, oh, I'm sorry, no, it's great.
And this could be coaching or mentoring too. I mean, there's lots of ways, but reflect and talk.
Can I just ask a follow-up on that? I think, as you guys have identified, stigma around wellness is one of the things, the barriers to wellness, and I think that's specific to medicine, even more so to surgeons, even more so to surgical trainees. So what would be some of the ways that you have found that you can correct, adjust, inform administrators or faculty members or colleagues that maybe are propagating that stigma?
So first of all, there's been a legislative effort to destigmatize mental health care for healthcare workers, right? So the Lorna Breen Healthcare Act was just signed into law by President Biden. And one of the goals is to destigmatize doctors seeking mental health treatment. Unfortunately, at a state licensing level, there can be issues, and I think it's, part of what I care about passionately is advocacy for doctors, right? Jeremy, who spoke right before us, has been my partner in working on some of these bills to support doctors and other healthcare workers. And I think we have to be very vocal in terms of licensing, that seeing a therapist or taking an antidepressant does not impair us from practicing medicine, right? So there is a legislative component to it, and it's all of our responsibilities to participate in that process. Maternity leave, paternity leave, wellness, resident mental health, these were not concepts that our seniors grew up with in their training. And, we still see people who are like, well, when I was a resident, I worked, 36 straight hours and I did okay. So working 130 hours a week was good for me, right? It's just not acceptable anymore. And I think, it's up to the governing bodies, the ACGME and, all of us to call that nonsense out, because it's nonsense. There is a paradigm shift happening. It's never fast enough. And the idea that you could be penalized as a doctor for getting mental health care is just appalling to me. But, we all have to fight for that, because you're absolutely right. And trust me, I fight for I have several residents sitting in the back, and I think they'll all say that I fight for them, and have since I started. But it's sometimes an uphill battle, you're right.
And I'll just say the other ways we work to destigmatize it on kind of the day-to-day is Journal Club will have every time we'll have either a wellness or professional development article in it to promote conversation. At least 2 grand round speakers per year who are not urologists or not speaking about urology, talking about wellness or wellness topics, right? It destigmatizes the conversation. And every day in the operating room, the Hopkins or Penn residents will tell you, we set an intention, we check in with each other, we have the conversations every day, and just to kind of normalize it, that it's okay to have these conversations. It's okay to talk about how you slept last night and when are you going to work out this week. Those are part of being a good surgeon over a long period of time.
This has been a really robust discussion. I have 50 questions written down that I didn't get to ask, but unfortunately we're out of time. Could we get a round of applause for our excellent panel? Thank you.
This has been an AUA Inside Tract podcast brought to you by the Residents and Fellows Committee. Check out the AUA University podcast for weekly episodes on the latest clinical updates and advances in urology. For more information about the AUA and membership, visit auanet.org.